room. It can also be accessed through the town website and Channel 18. Our first order of business today is a presentation by Laura Smead from J.M. Goldson, our consultant to update the housing needs assessment. So, Marcia, would you want to introduce Laura? Laura, as our housing coordinator, is going to introduce Laura. Can you hear us, Laura?
Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Excuse me, we have now met with the Goldson folks a couple of times, and I think we're going to be well pleased with the work that they're going to do. So Laura Smead is our project manager, and she's the one who's coordinating a lot of their efforts. So she's going to introduce whoever else is on the call. And we met with her, and at this point, we're really just trying to get the outlines of the schedule pretty much on people's calendar, keeping in mind we have to keep everything flexible because everything can change, but also very clearly when deliverables are expected, and therefore when hopefully your work will be to make sure that those deliverables are as we expected them to be. So I'll just turn it over to Laura and have her move through this. And I think Nancy's trying to keep this at 45 minutes so because we have a very full agenda. Laura.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you all. It's really nice to meet some of you for the first time. We will be a mix of, sometimes we'll be with you in person and sometimes we'll be with you remotely, and this is one of those remote times. And with me today I have Katanese Paz, my colleague. She's the community planning analyst at J.M. Goldson and helped me put together the data plan. So I'll kind of take the lead in the first part of the presentation tonight, and then Katanese will take the lead on the second part when we start going over the data collection plan. Yeah, we can get going. I see I can share my screen. So we do have a presentation to help organize our thoughts today. So let me share that. Okay, and see if I can get it in bigger. All right, is everybody able to see that? Okay, I see Katanese is nodding.
Yes.
Yeah, members.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. All right, so these are some of the points we wanted to cover today. To do a quick round of introductions, because this is the first time I've been meeting many of you, and you're meeting us, some of you, for the first time. We also wanted to briefly touch on the scope and schedule with you to kind of refresh all of our memory, what that entails. And also, both many members of the Housing Committee as well as the Housing Trust Board filled out our Project Launch Clarifier survey, so we can touch on some of the themes that we heard from those responses, and thank you so much for doing that. It really helps us focus in on and make this the best plan that we can for you. And then we'll review the data collection plan and get any early thoughts on that, although we don't expect you to necessarily have all of your final thoughts today. We're happy to take comments for another week before we actually start collecting the data. And then we can touch on some next steps, what to expect over the course of the summer, because we won't be meeting again with you all for a little while. And just so you know what we're working on in the meantime. All right, so starting with introductions. As Marcia mentioned, I'm the Senior Community Planner at J.M. Goldson and the project manager for this project. You'll also be seeing Jen Goldson here as well with me for most of the meetings, but today I have Katanese along for the ride as our analyst. And the firm has been doing housing plans and housing trust plans for many communities. So we also do a series of other plans, comprehensive plans and community preservation plans. So I'm quite familiar with the work, and I've had a chance to lead several housing plans since I've been with J.M. Goldson, and prior to J.M. Goldson I was a community planner. So I come from the public side mainly, and was very involved with the housing work in Canton, Massachusetts for many years. So I'm kind of familiar on it from from both sides, if you will. But I also want to get to know you a little bit. So if we can just kind of go around the room and tell me, your name and maybe how long you lived in Orleans and one thing about Orleans that you hope will never change.
Fran, you want to start that one? Fran always has an answer.
Hi, I'm Fran McLennan, and I have come here during the summer since I was 6 years old, living with my grandparents in Orleans. And my husband and I bought a house here in 1992, so we are now 30 years in residence, 20 of which have been full-time. And well, there's so many things I love about Orleans. I love its waters. I love its people. I love its open spaces.
Scott?
Hi, I'm Scott Flood. I had a house out here since 2002, but moved here full-time in 2015. And I will just reiterate what Fran said about what I love about Orleans, particularly the out of doors.
I'm Nancy Wren, and I moved here permanently about 14 years ago, but was another one of those people who came here every summer and enjoyed the life of Orleans. And of course, I love the beauty of Orleans, I love the water of Orleans, but I also remember over the years how important it is that everybody gets to enjoy Orleans, and I would like to see, I think one of the fun things that was surprised when we first moved here was that, because we always came in the summer, it was full of children and young people. And then in the wintertime, where did they go? So I think that's why I'm on this committee, and that's what I want to do. I want that to come back, I guess.
I'm Bill Stockert. Similar to previous speakers, my wife and I summered here, vacationed here for many, many years. We moved here 16 years ago. Absolutely love it, the outdoors, the water. But I think the thing about Orleans is the small town community spirit that it has and sense of community. And I think that has been really refreshing and something that I hope never changes. So, yeah.
Liz?
I grew up in Wellfleet. I'm 16th generation Cape Codder. I bought in Orleans in 2018, and for me, Orleans was actually the big city. So coming up here was always an adventure because this is where Bradley's was when I grew up, and it's not there anymore. But I actually dreamed about moving to Orleans when I was a middle school student, and I ended up buying in the neighborhood that I used to dream about buying in. So I've worked for the town of Provincetown for 6 years, been in municipal government for 10 years now. And I joined this committee because I have been watching my friends have to move in very large amounts to other communities, and I wanted to sort of be a part of the conversation to help retain the local families and sort of what I grew up with. So that's why I'm on this committee.
Marcia?
Marcia Algar. We actually bought our house here in Orleans in 2013, and prior to that, we had been summering in Wellfleet for many, many years, for all the kids' lives, basically. But we decided that we wanted Orleans because I was tired of the big city, but Wellfleet was a little quiet, so I thought Orleans was a great blend. Still a small town, and you could get from one end to the other pretty easily, but there's still some restaurants open at any point in time, and some other activity, and I really love the people here.
And we're missing two other people from our committee, Nancy James and Susan Carlson. Thank you.
Well, hopefully I'll have a chance to get to know them a little better next time. Thanks so much for sharing that. It sounds, a lot about what I love for my own community, and Orleans is a very special place. I'm familiar with it from my own summer vacations on the Cape. So you're very lucky to live there all the year round. All right. So next up, just wanted to touch again, remind us all of the scope. So we're putting together housing. I'll say a robust housing needs assessment for you. because not only are we collecting the data, different kinds of data, both quantitative, qualitative, survey, and doing community engagement, we're also coming up collaboratively with you some goals around housing stock and housing production out for the next 10 years. And then also working with you on a plan for how that can be updated. And I love that you're thinking about that as a part of the scope. I think that thinking about how it's going to be updated and implemented kind of from the very beginning is really smart. Okay, so this is our schedule. It might be a little hard to see depending on what kind of screen you're viewing it on, so I'll just try to summarize it verbally. We're here in May at the second meeting. Officially, we kicked off on the 12th of April, but that was just with staff, so this is really the first time. It's almost like a mini kickoff or kickoff part 2 with the full housing committee. We have regular check-in meetings also with a working group, and we will do those monthly regardless of whether or not we're also meeting with the housing committee or a joint meeting. Some of the meetings are with just the housing committee, but many are with both the housing committee and the housing trust board, especially when we're presenting on a key deliverable. So, for example, in August will be the first meeting with both of you. So so today we're going to talk through the first deliverable, which is the data collection plan. And then we'll be collecting all that data and doing focus groups and doing a community survey, and putting all that together into an analysis for you, and then presenting that in July. And then in August, that we will be starting to discuss some draft goals and what we've learned, and also trying to get out some outreach about a forum, which we are hoping to do in September. So that kind of covers the summer, and then moving into early fall. Oops, sorry.
Can I just interrupt for a
Mary.
second? Just a
Of
minute.
course.
That July
Yeah.
18th, that July 18th meeting is at the
Joint.
trust time. It's not our meeting, because our meeting is on July 4th. So that will be our meeting, the July 18th, the 18th meeting. And it will be with the trust, correct?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
that's what's listed.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, it does say
Okay.
third Tuesday.
Are there any other questions on this first schedule slide? Okay. So September is when we're shooting for the forum, which will be in person. We're looking at the 7th. I think that it is a little, we can also potentially adjust this date if needed, but it sort of wound up here so that we knew people would be kind of kids back in school time frame, and mid-September didn't work because there was another conflict with something I think on the town schedule, and we didn't want to push it to October because then it kind of pushes the whole timeline. So this is kind of where we landed, but we can also revisit that if needed. So doing the forum in September, that can help us with some of the goal vetting and prioritization, and any more need clarification. And then in October, we're going to present the results of that forum and the goal and strategy drafts. And then in November, we would be presenting the first full 10-year housing plan draft, and revising kind of their periods of revisions throughout each of these major deliverables. But if we're good to go, then we'd be presenting to the select board on that plan in November. And barring any other kind of revisions, we would be wrapping that up then in December and coming up with the plan for updating and reporting with you all. So we're trying our best to keep the meetings at the regularly held meeting times that you have. Second choice, if that was a conflict or you weren't meeting, would be to meet at when the Housing Trust Board normally meets. And then, of course, the select board's kind of on their own schedule. So that's the rhythm. And the schedule, which we can also, I believe, probably got sent to you separately as well, has, which deliverables are on which day and which days we're coming in person and which days we're going to be remote, at least on our part. So, any other questions on the schedule?
It's not.
Okay. Okay, so then we had 10 people fill out the project launch clarifier, and there were kind of different categories of questions. The first one was discussing hopes for the plan. And the first theme that came out is really wanting to make a case for, and a kind of a call to action on the need for affordable housing. How can this problem be quantified? How can the implications of inaction be stated? You also were hoping for current targeted understanding of housing needs and anticipation of future needs. So really looking for data that's useful, memorable graphic tables, charts, quotable summaries, not just kind of a list of data that's dry and hard to understand or not necessarily relevant, something that's really tailored and compelling to what's going on. And then also looking at goals that are above and beyond the 10%, knowing that the need is quite likely higher than that. I'm sure the data will bear that out. And also looking toward realistic and obtainable goals and strategies. So progress and data indicators that track and update, how to go about funding missing middle, those smaller developments, which kind of start to fall through the cracks of different funding opportunities, how to get projects, affordable housing projects, completed faster, and also looking at the village center as an opportunity for a vibrant mixed use and mixed income place, and wanting a phased implementation plan. So is there any other hopes, or if any of you weren't able to complete the project launch clarifier, is there any clarifications or additions or thoughts you have on hopes?
Go ahead, Fran.
The one thing that occurs to me is that we are also wanting to begin to focus on, you've mentioned the missing middle, but I think if the context that I see it there is the missing middle of housing types. But there's also the missing middle of income people who are priced out of the market. And one of our goals that we've been talking about is having some flexibility with our trust to be able to not only address the needs of folks who qualify for subsidized housing, but also those who may be a bit above and are simply priced out of the market. So expanding the definition of what we're looking at, I'm hoping is included.
Okay, that's great. Anything else to add on hopes?
Yes, I have a question about the ability to use the data that we're collecting to be able to create any kind of models that would allow us to project, let's say, the cost of inaction. I think we understand the problem. It's the implications of the problem that probably need a little light on them. And I'm just wondering if, I know that wasn't part of the charge going in, but if in some way we would be able to use the data for that kind of modeling construction. Because a lot of people don't see the problem in any really meaningful way. And so being able to identify that and call it out as such would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you. We'll have to think on maybe aspects of the data that can shed some light on that.
Anyone else? Liz?
So I've been thinking about this a lot, and I'm not even sure of how to like formalize the question, because I think I'm seeing this as like a Cape sort of issue. And I'm hearing this from a lot of different communities. It's about employment and how we are losing sort of people that we hire because they're then having difficulties retaining or obtaining rather sort of housing. And so my question really has to do with whether or not, or not even whether or not, but what would be sort of the guidelines and the restrictions and sort of the parameters that municipalities would have to function within in order to have the ability to have some sort of housing option that they could provide, because I do know that there are all sorts of fair housing laws, and when we're talking about projects and things like that. And my question is there an ability when we're talking about projects for municipalities to put things into the deed or to put things into the RFQ or into the contracts that we're entering into that would provide the municipality with a way in which either to lease or rent or something, because I just had the conversation today, actually, during staff meeting about losing staff because they weren't able to obtain housing for this summer. So I'm hearing that a lot in different communities. And I know that, yes, while we need to have housing for the residents of the town, I'm also thinking about the future functionality of the municipal government and how we are going to function in 5, 10, 15 years, if we don't have some sort of ability to help us also for the future. I don't know if that makes sense, because I think it's not something that we've seen a lot of, but I think it's something that we are starting to see, and wondering how, as a community, municipality-wise, we can set something up that would help us. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're thinking of town employees in particular, municipal employees, school and firefighters and police and so forth.
Yeah, yes. So today, for example, it was the police department that I was referring to, but I've literally heard the same thing multiple times over the last month for other departments where, we've given a job or we've offered employment and they've had to withdraw because they are not able to find housing.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's a way to put something into a project that we're doing. I don't know if that's even a possibility.
Well, it's certainly a strategy. There may be some strategy ideas or creative thinking from, either Massachusetts or even other states, that examples and case studies that we can find that can give us, some ideas.
And we are currently looking at deed restriction ideas for other properties. And there's a regional group that's starting to think about that as well, so there'll be some data from that as well. So, but the deed restriction is a complicated issue, and there's so many different levels, and I think it sounds like a nice solution, but we really still need a lot more data, and to see how it actually applies to our town and our ability to fund that. Anyone else? Okay.
All right. So the next one we looked at was what you're most curious to learn. You were certainly curious about kind of on the side of engagements. How do we engage Orleans population, wide engagement of all different segments, interested in how affordable housing is viewed, kind of the different camps that exist out there on affordable housing. Why is there resistance to affordable housing? What are the specific needs and barriers that people are experiencing? And what are the needs that are specific to maybe different income levels, different demographics? how are, things like short-term rental, seasonal housing, and all of that impacting the year-round housing? What is the amount, to the extent we can determine it, of homelessness? Because homelessness and being unhoused is notoriously difficult to, to measure, but we do have some kind of point-in-time snapshot data we can draw on. And how many of the community have housing costs that are above and beyond the 30, sort of 30% or 30% of their gross income. And then what are some of the barriers to achieving the goals that you're looking to do? The goals are yet, to be determined, but barriers to achieving those. And then tying back to that idea of these creative and innovative strategy ideas, especially in zoning, and wanting strategies to create housing that's affordable to young people and families. Is there anything else that comes to mind when you think about what you're curious to learn?
I think that's where the economic piece goes back in there again, more detail about this. I mean, we all know it's a reality and a problem, but how do we solve it, or what can we use to address this issue? I think that's really a key piece that I know I put it in mine, and I don't see it up there, so I think it's really actually very important.
Yeah, I think the economic piece probably got summarized in maybe one of this next
Okay.
ones.
Just a point of information. It's-
Yes, actually, and if it didn't, I apologize, because I do definitely remember seeing that, and so I've written it down again because I know that's important. It's definitely reflected in our data plan.
Just a point of information. It's actually interesting. The police chief and I were talking about homelessness in Orleans on Monday. They have clear data on it. It is changing.
great.
And that, I would reach out to them first to get that going.
Great, thank you for that. Yeah, the more sort of local, on the ground sources, data sources we can get, the better.
The police chief is also a very good resource for why it's so difficult to hire people of quality to live to work in our town. People, not people of quality, people who are qualified to do the job, but are having the same issues that Liz has spoken to, and we've had many meetings with him as well.
Anything else to add on this one? Okay, so now on to the challenges. Definitely a theme around not in my backyard or NIMBYism. The challenges, it really doesn't matter where you are. I think there's the sort of people who are afraid of change and skeptics, and people who are unaware really of the time it takes to get some of these affordable housing projects accomplished, and those who just maybe in general have a lack of openness to change and new approaches. So those are also people, we want to get their perspective on, for sure, and kind of understand where they're coming from. And also there's an educational piece that goes into that too. And of course, there's funding and financial resource challenges. There's only so much you can do as a town staff and funding sources, but to the extent that we can come up with some ideas for you and resources for you, we'll certainly include that. And then it sounds like a challenge is finding actual physical space for affordable housing. So I'm assuming that's talking about land availability, or maybe being able to have enough space for density of housing, depending on where it is, sewer, not sewer, infrastructure, things like that. Coordination is a challenge between both internally and with external groups, trying to all row in the same direction, and really reaching those people who are not already in your camp or who are not part of the choir. How do you convince the people who are voting on these budgets and these zoning laws about the crisis that is there and some of the implications of inaction, as you alluded to before. And then some of the specific challenges noted were really a concern about the seasonal housing, depleting the housing stock. I'm assuming that's, year-round housing stock and availability of that. And then how to provide alternative housing for families who are making above the 80% area median income, but maybe not actually making enough to afford a home at market rate. So anything else to add there on challenges?
Good to go.
No? All right. And then on a more hopeful note, greatest opportunities. So capacity building and education. There sounds like there are a good segment of residents who understand and believe that there's a housing crisis, that there's a number of different housing advocacy groups, both within the town and in the region, and there's a real opportunity to have an alliance among these groups, and also using the media to your advantage, and an opportunity to engage both residents and businesses to become part of the solution. And in the opportunities for sort of solutions and strategies and data, an opportunity for zoning changes, for more density or deed restrictions, that there's some new sewer infrastructure in the downtown area, and that's really creating some opportunity for some more density. And I believe that's what and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like it was a little hard for me to interpret, but I believe available land for development or density is related to the new sewer, that's opening up some new opportunities. And then there was some opportunities, it's more of around kind of vision of wanting to create a community that's sustainable and forward-thinking and able to attract families and visitors and businesses, at the same time taking care of the residents who are already here so they can remain here. And then you are embarking on a comprehensive plan update. So there is a chance of, the work we do here getting incorporated into that comprehensive plan and kind of carried on as a part of that larger vision for the community.
I don't know if this is in your abilities or not to do this, but we have a lot of things that are in place, and we've been talking about it. You mentioned the things that are in place, the sewers, zoning. We've been doing a lot of legwork on all this and background work to get things ready for this next step. But the question still remains is, what will get people or developers or individuals to take that next step? The infrastructure's there. We're thinking about it. We've got all these regional groups that are analyzing and thinking of ideas. But the question that I still have is, what is going to be the impetus for somebody to move to the next level to provide for this? Not just our own committee and the projects that we're doing, but public and other public and private activities. And I don't know if that's something that you can tease out to do or not, but that's my big question. Now that it's all there, what do we do? What makes it work?
Mm-hmm.
Fran?
One of the things, it mentions residents and businesses on the last line on the first bullet. You might want to add nonprofits, because I think there are a number of nonprofits in our area that are related to housing, environment, community life,
Yep.
that all really play a part, and I would assume what our goals will be.
Good. Anyone else? Thanks.
Great, thank you again for this. All right, and without further ado, I'll turn it over to Katanese to kind of lead the discussion on the data collection. This was a larger spreadsheet, so we broke it down into different parts, kind of different themed parts. And I'll let her take the lead, and then I'll just chime in places if I think of something.
Thanks, Laura. Hey, everyone. Again, my name is Katanace Bass, and I'm the Community Planning Analyst. And so based on what we've all sort of been discussing already, we put together this plan to look at different sections of data that'll help answer some of these questions that we might have. And so one of the first things we're looking at is just basic data. So things like your place name, population, the physical area, any regional context or brief local history that gives us a sense for who Orleans is, what are the populations, and just gives us a better picture. And so a lot of these will sort of be infographics or call-out boxes that have that information for us to look at. So the next slide, Laura. And then the next set of data is looking at demographic data. So looking at, as a lot of you have mentioned, who are the folks who are in these lower income levels that are missing out on housing? What is the age demographic, the population change, the household composition? And so looking at, for example, some of the census data that we have available, the American Community Survey, or even information from some of the reports that you guys mentioned in the RFP, like the Cape Cod Commission data. So trying to use all of that data to put together a bigger image of what the demographics look like in Orleans. The other section is current housing supply. So as you all mentioned again, looking at what currently exists in Orleans, what is it? Is it seasonal? Is it long year round? The quality of the housing. Does the community like the housing? Does the community have housing that it likes to see, or sort of is addressing their concerns or their needs? The housing size, pre-existing, or if there's non-conforming lots, potentially to look at some possible land areas that we could build on, and then any sort of other questions that come along with current housing. And again, some of this data is found through the census data, the community survey, but a lot of it also comes from the town data that we can get. So the Cape Cod Association of Realtors is a big one for us to see what sort of housing is out there, town zoning, community surveys, things of that nature.
And I think here's also where we bring in like local assessors data, or the local community survey that we'll do. And sounds like we should also talk to the police department on homelessness, so we can add that.
Absolutely, yeah. And a lot of those will be pie charts, and the town zoning shapefile, for example, is a map, so we can sort of see how the town's laid out and sort of what zoning exists where.
And the other thing that I'll just mention quick is, this is kind of the wish list of everything that we'll try to get and try to visualize. And then depending on what we find, if it's not that interesting, we don't have to show it, if that makes any sense. We'll customize this to try to, make sure we cover our bases, but also focus in and highlight the key takeaways.
And then the other section would be housing cost trends and affordability. So really diving deeper into the numbers or percentage of those making 80% AMI or lower, the housing cost burden that folks are feeling by affordability gap, looking at median price or median home prices and rental costs over the last 5 years, for example, or local and regional efforts to address affordable housing. So a lot of that will come from the Orleans Housing Authority, or again, HUD or CHAZ data. We would also look at the SHI data, so affordable housing in the area. And then again, we've also mentioned some of the reports that you added into the RFP. So some of the Cape Cod Commission or Regional Housing Plan data as well. So most of this will be sort of graphic information rather than maps, but we'll definitely see if there's something, as Laura said, that is more interesting to see visually as a map, or if it makes sense to have that as well.
Excuse
And
me.
here sorry, go ahead.
Do you want questions at the end when you're all done, or as you go along, which would be?
As we go along, it's perfectly fine, yeah.
Okay, I had a question on this one. The two questions that you ask about housing affordability for median income And then you have a question on low income. And this is kind of a follow-up to Fran's earlier comment. In the RFP, when it talks about the data collection, it talks about expanding or redefining those need indicators to enable comparisons over time with a wider range of income persons, such as up to 120, 150, and 200% of area median income. I'm just wondering if, in addition to those two questions, there might be the need for a third question regarding those levels of income?
Yeah, that's fine. We can expand that. So we'll have 80% AMI, 100% AMI, and then we can look at even, see what we can find for above, 100% AMI. Because that would be also really interesting to, if someone's making even 200% of the area median income and still can't afford a home, that's pretty
Right.
compelling.
It's
Yeah.
critical, actually.
So it just seemed like there's one question missing, one additional question.
Thank you. Bill.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely gives us a good spread of incomes in the neighborhood in town. Sure.
Nancy, can I offer just
Andrea?
another resource? On your design preference surveys, there's been a lot of work already done, particularly in Orleans, by both the Cape Cod Commission, the Governor Prince study, Union Studios did one, and there's an active survey now ongoing with the Cape Cod Commission. That's broader, I believe, than just Orleans. But we do have data going back years on Union Studios through the Cape Cod Commission and our own. So I don't think you have to look too hard for that.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, open to whatever data you guys have available. I would never say no to it. So if you want to pass that along, I'm happy to have that.
Yeah, and are we talking specifically, you said design preference studies, so kind of form and shape and type?
Yep, absolutely. And you can reach out to George Meservey. He'll have it in the planning office. And also, actually, you can go online at the Cape Cod Commission and pull it up, too.
Well, the Cape Cod Commission is doing a regional housing strategy, and as part of that, they're going to do a housing preference survey. So that's the one that's just coming out
But they
now.
also have history from
Yeah,
before
right.
17. It's dated.
Yeah,
But
when
it's-
they did the workshops way
Yeah.
back when,
Yeah.
yes.
Alrighty, and then earlier we mentioned economic considerations, and so this is where that data really fits in to answer those questions. And so looking at labor force socioeconomics, looking at incomes compared to housing and whether or not those align, or, as we know, some of them don't. Recruiting and retaining essential employees, so looking at how do we create housing to retain the staff that are able to work in our town and in the businesses that exist in the town. And then a lot of that is actually self-reporting or interviews or surveys that we will conduct. That's also a couple of other sources, as I mentioned, the census data and some of the labor market information that we can find in the American Community Survey. So answering, percent of working populations who can or cannot work and live in Orleans. And so monthly earnings and things like of that nature. So some infographics, pie charts, bar charts, and some call-out boxes from the results of the survey.
I just have a question. I'm not sure if it would be considered an economic consideration, but do you ever look at sort of services that are within the community for families? So for example, childcare. So there is not one infant to 3-year-old childcare center in Orleans. So is
I
that
don't-
ever looked at? Because that would, in my mind, if you don't have the services within the community to sustain families, what's going to attract them to come here?
Yeah, it's tough because as you say, housing and where it relates to so much. I think, that, and likewise things like access to healthcare, access to other kinds of services are also relevant. But I think that may wind up getting captured as a part of the comprehensive plan that you're embarking on. I don't know that there's other than sort of a reference to the fact that, that access to services certainly matters. And it could be that if we're looking at, barriers and barriers to housing, if that comes out of sort of focus groups and the community survey and stuff, we can certainly summarize that as, if that's a concern, especially if you're looking to attract more families and such, that they're like, well, I can't live there. It makes no sense. I'd have no place to, no one to take care of my child. We can summarize that. And all of the engagement that we do will also have in an appendix, kind of the full transcription of everything there. But in terms of what we're in the more brief summary, we'll do a much briefer executive summary of kind of the takeaways of what we've heard. And then, in appendix, have everything in a lot more detail.
So I guess,
in that.
sorry, to follow up to that, when you are asking the questions and you're doing the community surveys, is the age of the participant who is answering the questions ever looked at? So if you're getting feedback and you find that the applicants or the person submitting, you have an average age of 62, for me, it'd probably be very unlikely that a 62-year-old person would be talking about childcare.
Yes, yeah. We do ask demographic questions in the community survey, and we try to also, as we're gathering that survey data, check it against the population data to try to see if we're getting a representative sample of your community's demographics, and then we try to work with the town to better target outreach if we find that we're not getting enough representatives from, say, younger people, for example, or renters or something else, to the extent that it's representative in your community.
Any questions about this specific slide?
I don't really have a question right now, so my brain is wondering, this survey, what is the purpose of the survey that we're going to be doing? Because we're all in a lot of different areas, and we're trying to find out what the barriers are, what people think about housing. We had a housing survey a couple of years ago, and it came out a lot like what people thought about housing, what they wanted from the town, kind of thing. But I'm not sure. I want the focus of this to maybe be like a little bit more. What do you call the word? Granular. That's a good word. We've got to find out what we need to get it more to the point, and as opposed to a general, obviously. I'm not explaining myself well, except that I'm thinking that it's got to be more like, what barriers are there? What kind of housing do people want? I really think we need to get really specific here and not general.
I think we were also, and we just have to figure out how, we were trying to get to people who work here who don't live here.
Exactly.
That's a major missing gap. So we've talked to the consultant about it, so we're going to come out with a survey or one or more that will have different questions depending on. If you're a resident and you're older, that's one thing. If you don't even live in Orleans and you live somewhere else, but you work in Orleans, what are your needs? So hopefully we'll work on those gaps we have had in our prior data. They're going to use some commuting patterns, so we'll get a little better flavor for how many of the folks who work here have to commute from where and where they're commuting from, and some of those other things. But that is definitely a huge missing piece that was specifically in our RFP. And at various
I don't
points,
see it a lot up there, so I'm
Yeah,
thinking that we
yeah.
did talk about that quite a bit. So I just want to make sure that we have some
right,
control
right,
over
we need to
that.
talk about it. And then we've also, and I need to talk to Laura about it, and we've talked, George and I have talked about doing a survey possibly of town employees, or maybe we can do it of school employees, and we don't even have to do the survey. It's a matter of getting the word out about surveys and seeing if we can generate response out of groups that don't necessarily all live here and who have other interests in the town besides living here. They work here, they may send their kids to school here, they may have other connections, or they would get a job here if they could find housing, kind of thing. Those are all missing gaps. Certainly renters are always a missing gap. We get very poor response from renters. But part of it is what are our ideas of how to get better response from those groups. So I think that's part of what the challenge of, that maybe this committee can help with. How do we get to these people and how do we get them to fill out the surveys? Because generally for general surveys, we know it's, I hate to use the number, but the same 300 people respond to every survey, and we have to get beyond that.
I think the questions will determine if we can get people to answer the survey, though. I think
Yeah,
that
right. That's
is
the
important.
I'm not sure if it's worth considering, but, for me, I would look at it for, like, if I was answering this as the town of Orleans, for example, and I'm looking at it as an employee, or, sorry, as an employer trying to attract employees. If you approach it in a way that you're going to a business, right? We go to Stop and Shop. What are the barriers that they have that are restricting them from bringing in the employees that they need to provide a service to us? What are the concerns of the town of Orleans? What is the concerns? Let me think of another. I don't know. You could do Reynolds. He's a contractor. You could maybe do the Orleans Yacht Club. You could do a number of Ace Hardware. What are the restrictions that they are seeing when they're trying to get the employees that they need to provide the services to the community that we live in? And what are the barriers that they're finding? Because as you said, a lot of people that answer the surveys, or in my experience, what I've seen is a lot of people that are coming to talk and to come to these forums that we hold are all the same people. And so we end up getting the same information from the residents who are civically engaged. And so, I'm curious as to if I went to, again, if I'm looking at, that I always go to the town just because I think I know it. That's what I work in. But what is, the town say, okay, if we need to fill these positions in order to provide a service to our taxpayers, what is it that we're finding is our barrier to get that position filled? And, there's only so much we can do for compensation studies and salaries, because once you do too high, then you income them out, and so it just becomes this cycle of things. And so I don't know if it's worth it for us to have a survey that's more directed to the business owners, so that we can ask them questions, because they're the ones seeing it. They're the ones who are trying to hire people. They're the ones who are seeing that barrier and trying to understand it, because I just worry that when we send out the survey, it is going to be the same people that have always responded, and so we'll generally get the same response if we don't, try to approach it differently.
Okay.
Or maybe we
Yeah.
can get the employers to convince their employees who don't live in Orleans to fill out the forms. We have to think a little more broadly.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I can definitely speak to our efforts in making sure that different populations are responding to the surveys. We have our community engagement specialist, which really creates connections with as the nonprofits, like you mentioned before, that have those strong relationships with folks who are local to the town. But I think a lot of these questions we've done for other towns as well. We can do for Orleans as well. So asking, the connection or the relationship someone has with Orleans, whether they are both a business owner and a resident, or just a resident, or just a staff or employee, looking at what kind of housing they live in. So it's, whether it's like an additional dwelling unit they live in that they rent out, or if it's a house or a multifamily house that they live in. So a lot of these questions definitely can be added, but I'll let Laura sort of chime in on some of the other questions that came up.
Yeah, so I think how we were thinking of it was it would be the same link for the survey, but the survey would be adaptive. So depending on what you said in terms of your affiliation, whether you're employee, employer, town employee, or a resident, etc., it would ask you slightly different questions depending on what your role is, to try to drill down into barriers and specific needs. So we'll work closely with the working group on that, and I'm sure even though we don't have a a full meeting with you until later. We can certainly, run things by you for comment before it goes live. And we'll work closely with Marcia and town staff and outreach, but definitely outreach is where we can provide you with a list of ideas to get your thoughts going, but you guys are really the experts in knowing